The case of Christina and Thompson Harris. Christina and Thompson and Jason Thomas Harris, both 40, had been married for 11 years by 2014. They got married in 2003 after dating for about 5 years. In 2009, Christina and Jason welcomed their first child, which brought significant changes to their lives. Despite the daily challenges and responsibilities, they were happy to be parents. Christina took care of the house and the children while Jason worked at a plastics factory. As the children grew up, Christina was able to contribute financially to the family by working. However, in May 2014, she had to take maternity leave because she was expecting their second child in a few weeks. On September 29, 2014, Jason chatted with Christina while at work. Christina was suffering from a cold. She had a bad cough and was not sleeping well, but she reassured her husband that she was fine. A few hours later, Jason called his wife at home but received no response, which worried him. Unable to reach Christina, Jason asked a neighbor to check on her. He explained that Christina was sick and not answering the phone. The neighbor knocked on the front door but got no answer, so she called Christina's name. Receiving no response, she decided to try the door, found it unlocked, and entered the house. When she entered the bedroom, she found Christina lying on the bed and could not wake her. The neighbor called 911 and ran out of the house to call another neighbor, a nurse. The nurse checked Christina's pulse and confirmed that she had died. Thus, on September 29, 2014, for months after the birth of her second child, Christina was found dead at home. When the police arrived, Jason Harris was present. He told the police and paramedics that his wife had been sick but was alive when he left for work that morning. 2 days later, the medical examiner ruled that Christina died from an overdose of a controlled substance, a finding that shocked her family and friends. Most people who knew Christina, a mother of 2, including a newborn, believed that she had never used drugs. Christina's mother, Kathy, told police that her daughter was fine when she saw her the day before she died. Police were therefore skeptical of Jason Harris's claim that his wife had a cold. According to Kathy, Christina said her marriage to Jason was complicated. Jason was unhappy with the marriage but did not want a divorce because of concerns about child support and custody. Neighbors who discovered Christina's body also provided additional information to the police. Jason reportedly told them that the night before Christina died, he had prepared cereal with milk for her. Then Christina passed out and dropped the plate. Police realized that Christina's family and friends had a hard time accepting that she might be involved in drugs. Instead, police suspected that Jason Harris was involved in Christina's death. Christina's mother and sisters insisted that police test her breast milk. According to Kathy, the police ignored the request for 48 hours. However, thanks to the family's persistence, the police finally agreed to investigate. As a result, breast milk was used as evidence for the first time in Michigan history. As confirmed by Christina's family and friends, all drug tests at her workplace and at the hospital where she gave birth to her second child were negative. Her second child was only 4 months old when Christina died. Christina was breastfeeding, and Kathy confirmed that Christina was very careful about what she put into her body because she didn't want to affect her child. Christina often pumped breast milk while at work and stored it in the freezer. Some of the breast milk was left at Kathy's mother's house. They tested 3 bags of breast milk for possible drug residue. These bags were labeled with the date they were put in the freezer so Christina knew which bag to thaw first. Experts tested all the samples, including the ones frozen just before Christina died, and found no signs of drugs. This proves that Christina did not use the substance that killed her. Jason Harris's sister was the only one who suggested that Christina had used drugs, prompting investigators to focus more on Jason and treat Christina's death as a homicide. The investigation was slow, and it is unclear what would have happened if Christina's family had not been actively involved in the search for the truth. Kathy repeatedly reminded Davison police about her daughter's case in August 2016, nearly 2 years after Christina's death. Not seeing the enthusiasm and desire to solve her daughter's case in Davison, Kathy asked Davison police to turn the case over to the Michigan State Police, which had new investigators. From there, the story began to unravel. Police gathered a lot of information about Jason Harris, including how he acted before and after his wife's death. Jason had been having affairs with other women. Christina knew about this and confided in her family and co-workers that Jason had been texting other people while she was giving birth to their youngest child. Christina once told a co-worker that if she died, Jason would be the cause. When asked if she was serious, she said yes. Jason told his co-worker that he suspected the second child was not his biological child. He also complained that after the birth, Christina became depressed, often stayed in bed and did not go to work. Jason often complained about Christina nagging him. A co-worker of Jason recalled that Jason may have told him that he wanted Christina dead. He described the relationship between Jason and Christina as toxic and recalled that they argued frequently. One of the most surprising and shocking things about this case is that Jason Harris did not hesitate to let everyone know that he wanted to get rid of his wife. He tried to do so, but unfortunately, no one paid attention to his words and actions before Christina died. Jason bought poison twice and mixed it into her drink. Both times, Christina felt that the taste was unusual and did not drink it. Jason then asked a coworker to find him a poison that would not change the taste or smell of drinks or food. Jason said he wanted to knock Christina unconscious so she would not feel anything. When he shared with the coworker that Christina would not drink water because it tasted strange, the coworker refused to talk to him further. The coworker testified that Jason had talked about wanting Christina to stop nagging and that the coworker thought Jason was joking. Jason also told a coworker that he had hired someone to kill Christina, but the person was arrested for another reason before the murder. Jason therefore offered the coworker $10,000 from Christina's $100,000 life insurance policy to kill her. The coworker refused the offer, thinking that Jason was just venting his anger by talking about his wife and making inappropriate jokes. According to the colleague, he recalled a conversation with Jason in which Jason said, "I'm bored with her. I'm going to dump her." The police then decided to question the neighbor who discovered Christina's body. The neighbor testified that she saw Christina's family truck in the driveway, but Christina did not come to the door. She entered the house and found Christina lying in bed, unresponsive. The neighbor asked Jason if she should try to wake her up. He replied that Christina must have fallen asleep and that he would come home. The neighbor went back inside and removed the covers around Christina because she felt cold and had foam coming from her mouth and nose. The neighbor called 911 and another neighbor who was a registered nurse. The neighbor, who was a registered nurse, testified that Christina was cold, stiff, had no pulse, and had white foam coming from her mouth. She did not attempt to resuscitate Christina because she believed she was already dead. Jason told the police that he asked a neighbor to check on Christina and that he had to rush home because Christina was unresponsive. However, witnesses said Jason did not appear anxious or in a hurry. What raised suspicions about Jason was that morning he called Christina's supervisor at work. He told her that Christina had died the night before and that he wanted to inquire about the $100,000 death benefit from Christina's life insurance policy through work. Additionally, one of the women, Jason, had an intimate relationship with told investigators that Jason had contacted her on the day of Christina's death and said that his wife had died from an overdose of a controlled substance. This suggests that he knew what caused Christina's death even before the medical examiner's report. That evening, the neighbor he had asked to check on Christina saw him in his driveway. She said that Jason told her that Christina was not the angel her parents thought she was, and that their child would soon learn all the good and bad things about Christina. He said that Christina dropped her bowl of cereal, and he told her to go to bed. Jason also told a neighbor that his wife tossed and turned during the night, and that he heard her coughing before he left for work. Jason wondered if that was her last breath. Jason told a police officer that Christina was coughing a lot when he left the house. He also told the police that Christina fell asleep eating cereal the night before she died. Finally, Jason told Christina's mother, Kathy, that before she died, Christina complained that her water tasted like chemicals. One of the main motives in this case is believed to be insurance money. Within a week of Christina's death, Jason and his mother went to Christina's workplace to inquire about the life insurance money. Additionally, Jason received a $20,000 death benefit from a life insurance policy issued by his company shortly after Christina's death. One of Jason's lovers moved in with Jason and his children. Christina's mother believed that Jason's lover moved in with him after Christina's funeral. However, Jason's neighbor testified that the lover had even moved into Jason's home before Christina's funeral. The neighbor added that Jason's adult children from a previous marriage moved into the home within days of Christina's death. Police also discovered that Jason Harris purchased a plane ticket to Rhode Island 9 days after Christina's death to visit a woman with whom he had exchanged more than 5,800 text messages. County Medical Examiner Dr. Brian Hunter submitted postmortem blood and urine samples for laboratory testing. Dr. Hunter determined that the test results were consistent with Christina being poisoned by a lethal substance. Initially, Dr. Hunter determined that her death was an accident because there were no injection marks on Christina's body, and investigators did not find any powder residue or rolling papers next to the bed where Christina died. In 2016, the Michigan State Police took over the investigation into Christina's death. In 2019, after Christina's family disputed Christina's cause of death, Dr. Hunter later changed Christina's death certificate from an accident to a homicide. Police charged Jason with first-degree murder, solicitation of murder, and delivery of a controlled substance resulting in death. He was denied bail. Jason's attorney, Nicholas Robinson, said his client pleaded not guilty to the charges and wanted to fight them. When he was arrested, Jason had lost his job after testing positive for drugs. Kathy's efforts to ensure that law enforcement would punish the person responsible for her daughter's death were not overlooked. Gina's county prosecutor David Layton said that a few years ago, he began receiving Facebook messages and emails from a Davidson woman who claimed her daughter had died and that her death was not an accident. "It can't be happening," the woman told the prosecutor. She was certain that someone had caused her daughter's death. Kathy's passionate pleas caught David Layton's attention, prompting authorities to re-examine the death of her daughter, Christina. "I will never forget what she wrote in an email, prosecutor. You are my last hope. This is our last chance to get justice for my daughter. Please help me," David Layton said. "At that moment, and as I spoke to her this morning, I was absolutely convinced that her daughter's death was not an accident. It was the result of foul play. It was Kathy's relentless efforts to seek justice for her daughter's death that led to this situation, and those efforts paid off." The trial began in 2020. The prosecution alleged that Jason put a controlled substance in his wife's cereal bowl to kill her. He then went to work as usual, waited a few hours, and asked a neighbor to check on Christina. According to the prosecution, Jason wanted someone else to discover his wife's body in order to reduce suspicion against him. The direct evidence against Jason was overwhelming. Jason had a motive for killing Christina. He was having an affair with another woman, suspected she was cheating on him, believed the second child was not his, and was tired of her nagging. Jason did not want a divorce because he did not want to pay child support or lose custody of her. Before her death, Jason told a coworker that he wanted Christina dead. On the morning of her death, Jason called her company to inquire about a $100,000 life insurance policy. And in that call, he said Christina had died the night before. The jury heard clear evidence that Jason not only wanted Christina dead, but that he had tried to hire someone to kill her. He planned to do this and knew where to buy illegal drugs. In fact, he had purchased them on multiple occasions to give to Christina. At trial, multiple witnesses testified that Christina did not use drugs recreationally. Christina was very careful about what she consumed because she was breastfeeding. Furthermore, tests showed that her frozen breast milk contained no harmful substances. To support the theory that Jason had poisoned Christina's food, the prosecution presented toxicology reports. For example, Dr. Judge argued that Christina's death could have been caused by ingestion of some kind of poison. The prosecution ruled out injection because no traces of injection or needles were found at the scene. Dr. Judge also testified that inhalation was unlikely because no rolled-up dollar bills or snorting paper were found at the scene. The court gave Jason Harris a chance to speak, but he did not apologize or show remorse. Instead, he insisted that he was innocent. The judge said the jury did not believe your lies, ultimately exposing him as a selfish and deceitful murderer. On November 17, 2021, the jury found Jason Harris, 47, guilty on all charges. 3 weeks later, the court sentenced him to life in prison without parole. He has appealed the verdict, however. After the trial, prosecutor David Layton expressed his condolences to Christina's family and friends, emphasizing that this was a tragic case. Layton went on to say, "While this case has many unique and media-driven details, the most important thing is the family's loss. I hope this verdict helps them find comfort in knowing that justice has been served." Jason requested a new trial on the grounds that his defense attorney did not do a good job. He introduced evidence in the form of his attorney's testimony, showing that his defense attorney failed to seek an independent expert opinion on the prosecution's evidence and failed to consult with an independent toxicologist. Jason's defense attorney explained this decision as part of a trial strategy because he had thoroughly questioned Dr. Hunter and was able to show the jury that Dr. Hunter had changed his opinion about the cause of death based on information from a related civil lawsuit. In February 2024, the Michigan Court of Appeals upheld Jason Harris's conviction. He remains in prison for life without the possibility of parole. Kent in the UK is home to New Ash Green. The post-war development harbors a strong feeling of community and a sense of belonging. One of the residents was 46-year-old Sarah Wellgreen. Sarah enjoyed a close relationship with her family, and they would regularly meet up for lunch, shopping, and go on holiday together. Her mother said she cared deeply for other people and would always stick up for the underdog. Sarah was a devoted mother to her 5 children who were the center of her world. She would go all out for birthdays and other holidays. She had 2 sons, Jack and Lewis, from a previous relationship and 3 children with her partner, 39-year-old Ben Lacomer. She worked hard as a beautician and would work on evenings and weekends alongside bringing up her children. Her partner Ben Lacomer had been born in Greenwich, and in the early 2000s he moved to Majorca with dreams of becoming a pilot. The pair had met in December 2004 on a dating website. He made a good impression with Sarah's 2 sons, and Sarah decided to leave her job, and she and her 2 boys would move to Majorca to start afresh with Ben. But the happiness didn't last long. Due to her being unable to speak Spanish, she couldn't find a job, and this, coupled with her homesickness, made it very difficult for Sarah. Ben also wasn't able to become a pilot, so instead worked at the airport. They subsequently decided to move back to the UK, having already welcomed their first child. After settling into a new 4-bedroom home, 22 Bazes Shore and New Ash Green, Ben began working as a taxi driver, and Sarah would work as a beauty therapist. But the issues in the relationship began to show, with the pair arguing often. Sarah eventually decided to call time on the relationship, and in response, Ben threw her and her 2 sons out whilst keeping the 3 children they had together with him. Ben had arranged a court hearing for the very next morning in which he said Sarah had abandoned her children and consequently he was awarded custody. Sarah was unable to defend herself as she was unaware as to what was happening. Sarah was devastated. She and her eldest 2 children went to live with her mother and stepfather. Family saved every penny so they could be able to go and see a solicitor for legal advice. And in August 2016, she would be awarded full custody of the children. It was also around this time that her personal life began to move in a more positive direction when she met Neil James. Sarah met Neil on a dating app in 2016, and their relationship would go from strength to strength, culminating in an engagement. But Sarah was worried that if she tried to move in with Neil, Ben would battle her for custody. In 2018, she offered Ben the opportunity for them to live in the house together and cope her and their children despite their romantic relationship coming to an end, something her family had begged her not to do. This wasn't by any means an ideal solution as emotions between them were still running high. So Sarah decided to try and buy Ben's share of the house from him. Sarah had taken her children to school in the morning before heading to work to see her clients. She was also incredibly excited and happy as she had been able to secure a new, higher-paying job. At around 8 p.m., Sarah was seen coming home and heading inside. She sent several text messages, including to Neil. One message to a friend read, "There's always something to look forward to. You've just got to open your eyes and dream." The last text message was sent at 10 p.m. before she headed to bed. The next day was an incredibly special one, as it was one of her children's birthdays, and like always, she had planned for it. As the morning rolled around, Neil sent her a text message, but Sarah didn't reply. As the hours continued to tick by, still hadn't responded. Neil decided to reach out to Ben to see if he had seen her. Ben replied saying he thought Sarah was with him, as he hadn't seen her either. Neil called Sarah's family and explained that he had been trying to get hold of Sarah since the morning, but hadn't been able to make contact with her. Sarah could sometimes forget to charge her phone or accidentally leave it in the car, so her mother decided to call her too. But like Neil, she couldn't get hold of her. One of Sarah's sons used text messages, social media, and calling her work phone to try and get a response, but there was still nothing from Sarah. By the next day, she still hadn't come home. Her mother kept trying to get hold of her, but as Sarah continued to not respond, her mother knew something was seriously wrong. Everyone was becoming extremely concerned for her. They agreed that if by the next day she hadn't made contact with anyone or come home, they were called the police. It had now been 48 hours since Sarah Wellgreen had been seen, and she still had not been in contact with anyone. Ben contacted the police. DCI Ivan Beasley, senior investigating officer with Kent Police, was assigned to investigate her disappearance. Ben told the officers that after Sarah had arrived home on the 9th, he had put the children to bed and gone into his room, which was the loft conversion one, and she had gone to her room on the first floor. He explained that when he had woken up the next morning, Sarah wasn't home, but the car was still parked in its spot. As it was one of her children's birthdays, he said he had expected her to come home. A missing persons investigation was quickly underway, and a search of her bedroom was conducted. One thing immediately stood out. All of Sarah's personal effects were still there, including her money, bank cards, keys, and handbag. These were not things Sarah would have left without. For DCI Ivan Beasley, this was extremely concerning. As she had left her car keys at the house, one theory that was considered was that maybe she had gone out for a run or walk and become injured and unable to get help. A 5-mile search radius was set up around Sarah's home, going through fields and woodlands to try and find her, even checking hospitals to see if she had been admitted to any of them. In spite of all this, and after an extensive search, there was still no sign of Sarah. There were no phone records to indicate that she had agreed to meet up with anyone that night. DCI Ivan Beasley noted Ben Lacomer's demeanor. He said, "Ben didn't seem to be that concerned. The way he was presenting to us was described to me by my officers as quite odd. He didn't really want to engage with us. He didn't really want us at the house," which for somebody who had reported Sarah missing, he didn't seem to be acting in that way. He also said that officers discovered that Sarah's family had had to pressure Ben into contacting the police in the first place. Sarah's son utilized social media, and the close-knit community immediately came together to look for her. Hundreds of people from the local area came in to help. One of the volunteers, Sharon Bryan, noted Ben Lacomer's behavior. She said, "We were very baffled with Ben when during day 3 or 4 of our searching, he went into the village office to book the village hall, and we thought it was completely bizarre. There's half the village looking for the mother of his children, and he's trying to arrange a kids' game in the village." Sarah's oldest 2 children attempted to visit their siblings, but were told they weren't allowed. Lacombe had taken the 3 youngest to his aunt's house, and he had also started court proceedings to gain custody of them. DCI Beasley said, within a few days of her disappearance, Ben had gone to the family court and was trying to have an urgent meeting so he could have primary custody of the children. In order to generate any leads, the police issued a press appeal to get information about Sarah out to the public. But as the days continued to pass, Sarah Wellgreen still hadn't been found. Concerns continued to escalate that she may have been met with foul play. Detective Superintendent Paul Fotheringham said, "Police went back to speak with Ben again to try and gain a better understanding of the dynamics and ins and outs of the family home. He told them that Sarah would often go missing, disappearing without telling anyone to go and meet other people." The police went to Neil's house to search the property and ask him further questions, as he was one of the last people she had had contact with. He explained that he had called her at 924 on the night she had last been seen. They spoke for around 15 minutes and then sent a few text messages back and forth, before they said goodnight. Phone records showed that this was true, and as he was at home with his daughter at the time, He told the police to check the M25 cameras to prove he hadn't driven to Sarah's. His story checked out and Neil was in the clear. It had now been a week since Sarah Wellgreen had seemingly vanished, and police decided to check the local cameras, and more than 15,000 hours of footage would be searched. At around 2 a.m. on the 10th of October, the same time Sarah went missing, CCTV cameras picked up a car driving around. One of the images picked up on camera showed the vehicle with a logo on the driver's side door. Why did this pique the interest of investigators? Because it was similar to the vehicle driven by Ben Lacombe, a red taxi with a logo on the driver's side door. But the police had to be sure. They brought in an expert to compare his vehicle to the grainy one on the footage. The expert determined that the footage did show Ben's vehicle. Around 2 hours after it had first been captured on CCTV, the same vehicle was seen coming back. This appeared to contradict his annotations that he had been at home in bed when Sarah had gone missing. The home had an extensive CCTV system which was operated from Ben's bedroom so he could see the goings-on throughout the house. DCI Beasley said, "It was quite an elaborate setup. He had cameras at the side, at the front, and at the back of his house, all controlled by an assistant which was kept in his bedroom, which was in the converted attic part of the house. They checked the footage from the day Sarah had vanished. Ben was seen coming home, and nobody else was seen entering the property before Sarah came back. It wasn't just their home that had security cameras. Their neighbor's home did too. The neighbor's home had 3 months' worth of footage to watch. They could see that the CCTV camera from Ben and Sarah's home had been on almost constantly in the time leading up to Sarah going missing. The footage from the neighbor's house showed the infrared lights coming from Ben's cameras, and also showed that after midnight on the day she had last been seen, Ben's cameras had been switched off. Ben said the files from the cameras at his house weren't usable as they had been corrupted, and that the complex system in place actually hadn't been working for the past year. Another piece of footage that stood out to investigators showed him coming home. In the footage, his vehicle was clean. After taking the children to school the next day, the car was caught on CCTV again, and this time there was mud and dirt on the sides and wheels. At around 10:30, he went to the office where his taxi company operated. When the car pulls in, the dirt is gone. Another element that stood out was after watching the neighbor's camera. The police learned that he would always park his car in the same spot until the night Sarah had gone missing. That night, he parked it at the back of the property, somewhere not covered by the neighbor's CCTV. The task in front of the officers was huge. They didn't know where Ben had driven to that night and what he had done in the 2-hour window, and Sarah still hadn't been found. The police believed that he had murdered Sarah and then driven her body to a deposition site. On the 20th of December, the decision was made to arrest Ben Lacombe on suspicion of the murder of Sarah Wellgreen. He was then taken to the station to be questioned. Over the next 7 hours, he was interviewed by investigators. Lacombe was silent and refused to answer any question put to him. During a search of the house, a shovel was found in the garden shed that appeared to be brand new. They needed to find Sarah, ascertain the cause of death, and prove that this had been done deliberately by Ben Lacombe. Specialists from the fire service and marine units from all over the country were drafted into the extensive searches to try and find her, including part of the Thames and land near the Blue Water Shopping Centre. Roads were closed off while searches were conducted and 1,400 sites were searched, but none led to Sarah's body. In spite of this, and on the basis of the case that had been built on the 28th of December 2018, Ben Lacombe was charged with the murder of Sarah Wellgreen. At Woolwich Crown Court, the trial of Ben Lacombe would begin. Prosecutor Alex Morgan QC would say in a documentary about the case, "Having a trial with no body presents unique challenges." One of the key moments for the prosecution was revealing a conversation that Ben had had with police several days before his arrest. They had requested his phone. He signed the consent form, but then refused to give consent for deleted data to be retrieved. He told them that he would give it to them the next day at the station, because it was late and he wanted to go to bed. But CCTV revealed that Ben hadn't gone to bed. His car was spotted parked by the River Thames late at night, trying to get rid of something. Something police believe was his mobile phone. Following Sarah going missing, Lacombe was captured on a CCTV camera in a shop, buying a new phone in the exact same make that he put his old SIM card into. DCI Beasley said, especially when there are concerns for a loved one, but actually Ben was more interested in the information we could retrieve from his phone and refused to give us his phone. Another element of the case that they argued was evidence of planning was the hours in between him leaving the address and coming home, indicating he had already chosen the deposition site for Sarah's body. When it came to the shovel that had been found during the search, the defense argued that it was there for his mother, so she could look after the flowers that were in front of the house. But the flowers of the home did not require such a big shovel, adding to the theory that it had been potentially used to dig a grave. Allison Morgan, QC from the prosecution, said that the idea he had bought what she referred to as a gravedigger shovel as a present for his mother was complete nonsense. Over the course of the trial, more information would be revealed that painted a clearer picture of Ben and Sarah's relationship. When she arrived home from work on the 9th of October, she told Ben that she was planning to buy his share of the house, as her new job would leave her in a financial situation where that was feasible. This meant that in more ways than one, Ben Lacomer was losing control, and if she were to leave him for good and sell the house, he would have been left with virtually nothing. The judge, jury, counsel, court clerk, and ushers were given a police escort to the family home to help them contextualize the evidence and see the inner workings of the home, including the intricate CCTV system. Defense barrister Rebecca Trolak, QC, concluded their case by saying, "What I ask of you is a lot less than what the prosecution asked. They are asking you to convict a 39-year-old man with no criminal convictions, not even cautions, of the carefully planned murder of the mother of his children. That is a big ask." After 30 days of the trial, it was time for the jury to deliberate. They would soon return their verdict. On 28th of October 2019, Ben Lacombe was found guilty of the murder of Sarah Wellgreen. He received life in prison with a minimum term of 27 years. He has never revealed what happened to Sarah or where she is. Should he continue to refuse to divulge any information, it could mean he remains in prison for a longer time under Helen's Law. Helen's Law, named after murder victim Helen McCourt, makes killers ineligible for parole if they do not tell police where they've hidden the body of a victim. This followed the tireless campaigning of Marie McCourt, mother of Helen, a 22-year-old insurance clerk who was murdered in 1988. Her murderer, Ian Sims, has never revealed her body's location. The petition calling for Helen's Law had gained more than 600,000 signatures and high-level government support. In November 2020, Helen's Law received royal assent. Under the law, killers could still be released if no longer deemed a risk to the public, even if they refuse to disclose information. But the parole board will be legally required to consider whether they have cooperated with inquiries as part of their assessment. One of Sarah's elder sons said, "There's still that missing piece, and it will always be like that because there'll always be that missing piece because of what he has done. I believe he's withholding that because that's the only sort of power he has left." Sarah's ex-husband also spoke about him wanting her body to be found. In the year that followed her disappearance, nearly 3,000 potential deposition sites have been identified, but none have led to Sarah. The community in New Ash Green has never given up on their search for Sarah Wellgreen. They have said they will never stop their search for her, and a Facebook page called Search for Sarah Wellgreen was set up too. For those who knew and loved Sarah, the agony of not knowing where she is and what happened to her is devastating. It is the hope of Sarah's family that he will one day reveal her whereabouts so that she can finally be brought home and laid to rest. The case of Vicky Glass. Vicky Glass was born on September 21, 1979 in Stockton-on-Tees, a small town in the northeast of England on the banks of the River Tees. She has an older sister named Claire, who is 1 year older. When Vicky was 6 years old, her parents, Deborah and Anthony, decided to divorce. Her mother, Deborah, later married another man named Colin Goodall, and Vicky had a half-sister named Cheryl and a brother named Thomas. Although her parents divorced, they continued to live in Stockton. Vicky developed a passion for music from an early age, becoming a big fan of Michael Jackson and the musical Cats. Between the ages of 13 and 18, she joined a local jazz band and often performed with her friends. After graduating from Blackstone High School, Vicky continued her studies at the academy and earned 5 college degrees. However, her life changed dramatically. At 18, Vicky fell in with a bad group of friends and began her drug addiction. Her illegal activities were mainly in the Cannon Park and Gresham areas of Middleborough, near her hometown. In 1999, Vicky became homeless and contracted severe pneumonia. During this difficult time, her friend introduced her to a man named Patch Claus. This man provided her with a temporary place to heal. For months, Vicky lived with Patch, who cared for her and provided her with medication. However, this support was not enough to help Vicky escape her addiction and unhealthy lifestyle. On September 23, 2000, a few days after her 21st birthday, Vicky left Patch's house with her friend for the last time. She had initially stayed at Cannon Park in Gresham. Vicky also worked as an escort on Set Road in Middleborough, and they drove to Main Road. Main Road was notorious for escorting and illegal activities. After staying there for a while, Vicky and her client left and hailed the ring taxi. The taxi driver then took them to a man's house in Norton, only 3 blocks away from where they had left. Vicky stayed there once more before hailing another taxi to return to Middleborough. The taxi that picked her up was a white Vauxhall Vectra, registration number 790. At 4 a.m. on Sunday, September 24th, she got out at the intersection of Union Road and Ashwood Square, near a pub called The Colleague. From there, Vicky was only a 5-minute walk to Patch's residence, where she lived with the man. However, she did not return home. Patch became concerned when Vicky did not return and began calling, visiting friends and going to places she frequented. But there was no news of her. After 3 days, he contacted the police. And on September 27th, an investigation into Vicky's disappearance was launched. A week after Vicky went missing, on October 5th, the local paper, the Northern Echo, published an article headlined "Missing Young Woman." In the article, Vicky was described as being about 5 feet 1 inch tall with blonde hair tied in a ponytail. She was wearing a white t-shirt, light gray trousers, and white trainers. The article also quoted a police officer as saying that Vicky was a known prostitute and frequented hot spots. Vicky's family refused to give up and were determined to find out who was behind the incident. In 2018, the police received additional funding to try to find a criminal. On Friday, November 3rd, a man was walking his dog in the village of Demi, 20 miles southwest of Middleborough. At 6 a.m., he walked past a ditch near the main road in the village and discovered the decomposing, unclothed body parts of a woman. He quickly called the police, who arrived and identified the victim as Vicky Glass, a 21-year-old woman who had gone missing. The cause of her death has not yet been determined. North Yorkshire and Cleveland police immediately began an investigation. A team of 40 police officers were sent to the scene to collect evidence and conduct forensic examinations. However, no traces were found at the scene, and the clothes Vicky was wearing when she went missing were not found. Detective Brian Dan, who is leading the investigation, has appealed to journalists to contact anyone who knew Vicky, spoke to her, and has any information that could help the investigation. As Demi was a popular tourist destination, police appealed to anyone who might have been in the area to contact. Police noted that the car that brought Vicky to the village may have stopped on the roadside outside the village before entering the village and asked people to be aware of this stop. On November 13, 2000, Vicky's mother Deborah addressed the press appealing for witnesses to her daughter's disappearance. Police placed a picture of Vicky in the pub where she was last reported missing, as well as in other areas of the city where sex workers were known to operate. By November 20th, police had interviewed nearly 500 people and received more than 150 statements. Those interviewed included former clients of Vicky and drivers who used the Cannon Park overnight car park where Vicky and other sex workers often worked. The police laid flowers on her grave where her body was found. They then appealed to the public for any information that might help them find the culprit. 2 men in Vicky's family tried to stay calm, appealing for the public's cooperation in the investigation. Meanwhile, Vicky's mother, Deborah, was extremely distraught and could not attend the ceremony. After questioning many people, the police found important information. They said that about 12 prostitutes may have information related to Vicky's disappearance. The police began a more thorough investigation. In March, the police began to closely monitor lorry drivers stopping at Cannon Park car park. Next, the police arrested a 39-year-old man from Grimsby, but he was released on bail and his identity is still kept secret from the public. On January 9, 2002, police arrested a 47-year-old man on suspicion of being involved in Vicky's case. 2 days after his arrest, on January 11th, the man's name was given as Eric Coates. He was a resident of South North Yorkshire and lived about 45 miles south of Middleborough. Eric regularly used the services of prostitutes and was a client of Vicky. This was the third time Eric had been questioned about Vicky's disappearance. Police searched his home where he lived with his parents. Police said Eric could not provide an alibi for his whereabouts on the day Vicky went missing, although he did mention that he may have been at his home because it was his father's birthday that evening. Eric Coates later gave an interview to the Northern Echo saying that, according to rumors, Vicky had been murdered over a drug debt and that he did not want anyone else to die like that. He also expressed hope that a criminal would be found. Police found no clear evidence and Eric was released without charge. In July 2002, Cleveland police announced their intention to question another suspect, John Taylor. John had been sentenced to life in prison for the kidnap and murder of 16-year-old Leanne Turner in Leeds, West Yorkshire. He kidnapped Leanne Turner while she was shopping in the city centre on Christmas Eve 2000, took her home, and brutally murdered her. Leanne's body was found 9 months later by Cleveland Police Inspector Jim Tate. Policeman Jim Tate told the press about the progress of the investigation, but no further information about John Taylor was available in connection with Vicky's case. To mark the second anniversary of Vicky's death, in September 2002, her mother, Deborah, held a press conference appealing for help from the media. In her heartbreaking speech, she shared the pain she had suffered since losing her child and how she had considered suicide because she could not bear the pain. After a long delay, a further investigation into Vicky's case was launched. However, when this investigation was carried out in August 2003, the results of Vicky's autopsy could not determine the cause of death. This was because Vicky's body had decomposed so badly over time that many of her body parts, including major organs and some bones, were missing. The subsequent investigation also found no signs of injury or abuse to Vicky. Later that year, Vicky's mother, Deborah, and stepfather Colin visited the site in Denny where Vicky's body was found to pay their respects. They were followed by reporters from ITV. In a 20-second video, Deborah can be seen fighting back tears as she says Vicky did not deserve to die like that. Gordon Lamp from Cleveland Police also said that despite 10 years having passed, they would continue to try to find the criminal responsible for Vicky's death. 10 years after Vicky's death on September 24, 2010, her parents spoke to reporters for information and discussed the emotional pain caused by the decade-long hunt for her killer. Her mother, Deborah, said she thinks about Vicky every day and cannot get over her loss. Vicky's mother, Deborah, died in 2015 at the age of 55 and will never know who was responsible for her daughter's death. In 2017, Cleveland Police, along with Crime Commissioner Barry Coppenshaw, applied for special funding from the Home Office to fund the investigation of 3 old criminal cases, including Vicky Glass's case. The story of Vicky Glass, it all started with her disappearance. But the reason why she was killed is still a big question. Currently, the mystery of Vicky's death is still unsolved, and this causes unbearable pain to her family and friends. People continue to search for answers and hope to catch the culprit responsible for Vicky's tragic death. But unfortunately, after all these years, the culprit is still not found. 87-year-old Gladys Godfrey lived alone in a bungalow on Devon Drive on the Ladybrook estate in Mansfield, England. The estate was mainly populated by elderly people. There was a strong sense of community and everyone knew each other. As she was housebound, she used to sleep in a chair in her living room. And as she struggled with her mobility, she would use a walking frame to get around. She was friendly and kind, well known in her local area, and a much-loved member of her community. She could often be seen standing on her front doorstep saying hello to people who passed by. She had no children but was very close to her niece Sandra. Sandra would visit her aunt once a week and the pair enjoyed a fantastic relationship. When Sandra was a child, her mother had had to work and Gladys was a huge part of her life and had helped to bring her up. Sandra had said she was like a second mother to her. On April 28, 2001, Gladys's bungalow was broken into. At roughly 3:30 in the morning, Gladys was asleep in the living room. She was awoken by a knocking at the front door. After Gladys got up from her chair and opened the door, a man stood in front of her. He pushed her back in and forced his way into the property. She was sexually assaulted after he had knocked her over. She was frail, standing at 4 feet 11 inches and around 6 stone, but she was able to hit the attacker with a bottle of lemonade. She scratched him and also pulled an earring from his ear before he took her bag and ran away. When the police arrived at the scene to take her statement, she was able to give them a description. The person who had attacked her was a slim, young, white man with dark hair. As she had scratched the offender during the struggle, samples were taken from underneath her fingernails, and these, coupled with the earring, were sent away to be analyzed. A partial DNA profile was found and compared against the National DNA Database. The National DNA Database, formed in 1995, holds DNA profiles and samples taken from police suspects and samples taken from crime scenes. When this partial DNA profile taken from under her nails was put through the database, it came back with no matches. Over the days that followed, her handbag and other items that had been stolen from her house were found. Her bag was discovered on Arundel Drive, and they were able to plot the other items on a map, illustrating the direction the attacker had gone in. Paul Bacon was a solicitor and former president of the Nottingham Law Society. He said this demonstrated how caring the community was, as they had all worked hard to get Gladys' items back to her. He also said that based on the location of the stolen items, it was apparent that this was a local person who knew the area. But as time went by, the police were unable to identify the offender. On Saturday, September 7, 2002, Gladys had spent time at home whilst also seeing her best friend during the day. At 5:15 a.m. the following morning, the panic alarm was triggered. The warden at her complex did not go to her bungalow. A few hours later, a neighbor went round to deliver a paper and found that Gladys' home appeared to have been ransacked. Police officers were called to the Ladybrook estate at around 9:30 a.m. When officers entered the property, they found the body of Gladys Godfrey. It was apparent that she had been subjected to an appalling attack. A postmortem revealed a catalog of more than 20 injuries. Clumps of her hair had been viciously pulled out. Her neck and skull had both been fractured. She had died from manual strangulation as well as head trauma. So severe were her injuries, her family were not allowed to identify her body. Her walker that she had used to get around was tipped over on its side, and there were blood stains near the fireplace in the living room, and on the base and pillow of her bed. Based on the evidence at the scene, it appeared that the initial attack had taken place in the living room of the bungalow. As there was hair and blood by the fireplace, it appeared that she had been pushed to the ground. There was one blood mark that immediately got the attention of investigators. A footprint. Footprints can often be key pieces of evidence at a crime scene. The crime scene manager was able to ascertain that the footprint most likely belonged to a Euroland shoe, and this coupled with the fingerprints found in the bungalow added to the pile of evidence being gathered. After being beaten viciously, it appeared that she had been dragged into her bedroom, whilst in her bedroom she had been raped. Those who were known to Gladys had their fingerprints taken to compare with the fingerprints found at the crime scene. After doing this, there were still fingerprints inside the bungalow belonging to an unknown person. The community was in shock. How could a frail pensioner, who was known and loved by many, have died in such an appalling way? Detective Chief Superintendent Phil Davies said there was no evidence of items being stolen, nor was there sign of a forced entry. He said, during a press conference, Detective Inspector Stuart Bailey said that they now believed the person who had committed the first attack in April of 2001 could also be responsible for her murder. Bradley said, because of the similarity in the two offenses, which were both in the early hours of the morning and at a weekend, we believe there could be a connection. We are considering a link. We are not saying there is definitely a link, but there is a strong possibility that these offenses could be linked. Kevin Flint, the senior investigating officer for Nottinghamshire Police, said, the partial DNA profile from the attack on Gladys in April 2001 was compared to the full profile taken from the scene of the murder. This came back as a match. Whoever had attacked Gladys before had come back and murdered her. The task before the officers was huge. They needed to speak with neighbors and people in the area to try and gain any knowledge that could help catch her killer. A detective constable who was knocking on doors, Phil Cumberpatch, said, "Every time you thought you were having a bad day, you thought of what happened to Gladys and cracked on." Although they had a DNA profile, this soon proved fruitless. Whoever had raped and murdered her had not been arrested before, and their profile was not on the national DNA database. Not only had this offender's crimes dangerously escalated and increased in brutality, but people had no way of knowing if he would attack again. 2 months after the murder of Gladys Godfrey, her niece Sandra spoke at a press conference and appealed for anyone with information to come forward and talk to the police. "Somebody must know something, and we just hope it will shake the memory to come forward for the slightest little thing that might be interesting. The whole family is devastated by it all." Detective Inspector Stuart Bradley said, "The DNA is absolutely vital in that it will be able to take us forward, and we will be able to eliminate people who are put forward to the incident room very, very quickly." Nearly 5 months after Gladys' murder, Crime Watch ran an appeal on her case to try and generate any new leads and as much publicity as possible. Sandra told the show she was poorly and she was very frail. "We did not expect her to carry on many more years, but for her to live the life she has led and then die in these circumstances, it was devastating to us all." The police kept in contact with Sandra to keep her up to date, but they still seemed no closer to closing the case. As they were still struggling to catch the killer, the police decided to change their strategy. As they had a DNA profile of the killer, they decided they would take DNA samples from all over Mansfield. It would be one of the largest elimination screenings in their history. It was voluntary, and more than 1,000 men gave samples over the following months, demonstrating how desperate the local community was to catch the killer. Unfortunately, after the mass screening was completed, the officers were back at square one. None were a match to the killer. In 2003, the Forensic Intelligence Bureau, known as the FIB, was established. Work was being carried out by scientists in Birmingham to conduct further research into familial DNA searching, aiming to find families a DNA sample could be from. Nottingham Police Force volunteered to be one of the first to trial this new investigative tool. Francis Bates, the senior intelligence officer, led the work on familial DNA testing. The FIB worked in collaboration with the police and visited the area. They were able to produce a list of people that could have been related to the murderer. Richard Pinchin, the head of the FIB, said, "We established the first forensic intelligence bureau in the world, which primarily was concerned with looking at DNA from scenes of crime and analyzing that and trying to forward investigations when no other information was available. The FIB would run the sample from the crime scene through the familial DNA search engine. Doing this reorders the DNA found on the DNA database in order of similarity to the sample." Richard Pinchin said, "Familial DNA is the same as an eyewitness. It narrows down a list of people for the police to talk to." Nearly a year had passed since Gladys had been attacked and murdered in her own home, and the police were still searching for whoever was responsible. More than 2,500 men had been compared to the DNA sample, and they still had not been able to find a match. Those in the local community were living in fear, terrified that the killer could strike again. The police had followed more than 8,000 lines of inquiry, but had still not caught the murderer. In response to the feelings of fear, more than 2,000 free security alarms were given to older people living on the estate, and more than 1,000 personal alarms were given out too. Alongside this, Nottinghamshire County Council also issued leaflets to vulnerable people in the area, according to a BBC report urging people to check the identity of everyone who calls at their door before they let them in. Don't let anyone in unless you know who they are, and if you are in any doubt, call the police. The police appealed once again to the public for help, with Gladys's niece saying, "I just hope somebody out there, if they know the slightest little thing, even if they think it is not important or irrelevant, then please come forward." 15 months had now passed since the brutal sexual assault and murder of 87-year-old Gladys Godfrey. When it came to the familial DNA testing, the first thing the intelligence team did was look at anyone on the familial DNA lists who was local to the area and draw up family trees to eliminate as many people as possible. 2 families became the immediate priority. It was voluntary for the men in these families to offer their fingerprints and DNA to rule them out of the inquiry. These samples were compared with the killer. Just 24 hours later, the news would come in that would blow the case wide open. They had finally had a match for the DNA taken from the intimate swabs, the partial profile taken from underneath her fingernails from the first attack, and the fingerprints matched 12 of the fingerprints found in the bungalow. This was a bittersweet moment for those involved. Gladys Godfrey had been subjected to a sustained and brutal attack and had died under unimaginable circumstances. But the person responsible had now been identified. An arrest plan was drawn up and their prime suspect was soon in custody, 22-year-old Jason Ward. He was arrested at work on the 5th of December and was swiftly taken to the police station to be processed and interviewed. In spite of the plethora of forensic evidence, he denied that he had anything to do with the sexual assault and murder of Gladys Godfrey. A search of his home was conducted to help build the case against him. In the search, they found a Euroland shoe. Analysis showed that it matched the footprint found at the scene. Traces of blood were found on the shoe also. This came back as a match for Gladys Godfrey. As the evidence continued to mount, he admitted to being the person who had gone into her bungalow and carried out the sexual assault. Jason Ward was charged with sexual assault and murder. After he was charged, he finally confessed to everything. Jason Ward was remanded in custody. He was also charged with the attempted rape of Gladys in April 2001. He was given the date of the 28th of May when he would have to go to Nottingham Crown Court. Ward had worked as a machine operator and had lived on Bentonk Street, less than 2 miles away from Gladys Godfrey's home. His previous address had been a quarter of a mile away. Just before the mass DNA screening had started, Ward had moved to just outside of the priority screening perimeter. According to a BBC article, he lived with his mother and father and had few friends, choosing to spend much of his time alone. He had had substance and alcohol abuse issues and had received a fine for being drunk and disorderly. Someone who knew him in school told the BBC Ward was strange, weird, and easily led. Paul Bacon, who had worked on more than 50 murder cases, was appointed as Ward's defense. He would later say in a documentary that it was really difficult to understand his motivation for the offense, adding, "I think he found it difficult to understand his motivation too." It was arranged for psychiatric evaluations to be carried out on Jason Ward. At his first court appearance, he entered a plea of guilty to the burglary, indecent assault, rape, and murder of Gladys Godfrey. Jason Ward was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 22 years for the rape and murder of Gladys Godfrey. The judge took the psychiatric evaluations into account when deciding the punishment. Frances Bates from the Forensic Intelligence Bureau, who led the pioneering familial DNA testing that helped catch Ward, was there for the sentencing. She said, "I was sat in the public gallery near the family, and to see the family's reaction, and to see that they had got closure in this case meant a great deal to me. I was only a small part of the case, but to know that I had helped provide that closure was really important to me and something I still think about to this day." When talking about the vital work of familial DNA testing that had helped catch Ward, Richard Pinchin said, "Without that case and without those people working together, we would not have been able to prove how effective this was. This was a landmark case. It was the first time anywhere in the world that familial DNA searching had solved a murder. The murder of Gladys Godfrey shocked the close-knit community and devastated her family. Through the pioneering work of the FIB, familial DNA testing, and the commitment of investigators, her killer was finally brought to justice." The case of Belinda Temple. Belinda Temple was born and raised in Texas. In 1986, Belinda went to college in her hometown while her twin sister, Brenda, left to study at Stephen F. Austin University. Belinda decided to stay with her parents because she was dating Marshall Comer, who was 3 years older than her. She was completely absorbed in the relationship. However, Belinda's parents were not pleased. They were concerned that the relationship would disrupt her studies, leading to her having children early and dropping out of school. This caused a lot of tension in the family. Belinda's mother, Carol, did not agree to her daughter living with Marshall. Belinda was a strong-willed and determined girl, and she may have taken her mother's advice as a threat. So at a family dinner when Marshall was invited, Belinda and Marshall, despite their mother's objections, announced that they were getting married. The atmosphere at the dinner table became heavy and quiet. Belinda decided to get married to prove to her parents she was an adult. Her boyfriend wasn't eager, but didn't refuse. They married without a grand celebration, with Belinda wearing her sister's white dress and spending the day with friends drinking champagne. The next day, she moved in with him at his parents' place. The marriage was mainly to stop her mom's criticism and gain independence. But not 6 months later, Marshall began to spend little time at home, saying he was working late, but was actually with another woman. Belinda found out when she noticed that her husband was acting strangely one day. She waited until his workday was over and followed her husband, and that's when it all came to light. Marshall was walking hand in hand with some strange woman, most likely with his colleague. Belinda didn't start any arguments or jealousy. She just packed her things and went back to her mother. Marshall kept trying to ask for Belinda's forgiveness, but she wouldn't budge. After that, they soon divorced. In 1987, Belinda had nothing to keep her in her hometown, so she decided to follow her sister to Stephen F. Austin State University. Her time at the university was a positive experience for Belinda. It seemed that she had found her purpose. In addition to studying, Belinda also worked part-time as a basketball coach, and the young girl had very high expectations. At the same university, Belinda met David Temple. Like Belinda, he was also a part-time coach, but in soccer, and he was also a member of the university soccer team as captain. For David, soccer was an integral part of life. He had started practicing soccer since he was a child, and from that time on, it was clear that he had the potential to become a star at school. He often played soccer very successfully for the team and was respected by all the teachers, despite his unpleasant personality. David can easily insult or even hit someone, but he gets away with it easily when he is on the field during a match. He often starts the match in a heated situation and then takes a long time to calm down. One of David's teammates said that he has an aggressive nature because of his steroid use. However, in their relationship, David acts completely differently from Belinda. He becomes a caring person and loves her very much. As soon as someone smiles at Belinda, David becomes jealous and tries to clarify his relationship. Belinda met David's family and they were impressed with her. They thought that Belinda and David had a lot in common. But Belinda's sister was not happy about the relationship. They knew Belinda as a strong-willed and independent person before, but as the relationship began, they noticed a change in her. Belinda became withdrawn, quiet and modest, and her life seemed to revolve around pleasing David. Belinda also began to distance herself from her family. She called her parents less often and stopped visiting home as she used to. This was a worrying sign in a toxic relationship. However, David and Belinda continued their relationship. They bought a bull terrier and named him Shaq. After graduating from college, they decided to get married. In January 1999, David and Belinda Temple were expecting their second child. Belinda was nearing her due date, and doctors predicted that she would go into labor in a few weeks. As a pregnant mother, Belinda often felt tired and fatigued. She also had to care for her son Evan. To give his wife some rest, David decided to take Evan for a walk in the park that evening. They walked in the fresh air, but soon felt tired and hungry. They then went to a restaurant for a bite to eat. When they got home, David was shocked to find the front door of his house broken. To keep Evan safe, David quickly took his son to a friend's house who lived nearby, and when his son asked why he couldn't come home, David lied and said his mother was in the hospital. One of David's neighbors, Quentin Harland, had just opened the door to the unexpected visitor, David. He carried his son straight into the living room and quickly returned to the house. Quentin was confused by this and yelled for his wife to watch the child and ran after David. He asked David what's going on, but when he saw the broken front door of the Temple house, Quentin realized that David probably had no idea what was waiting for him inside. When he entered the house, Quentin saw a horrible scene. Everything was in ruins. The cabinets were open. Furniture was scattered on the floor, and especially there were blood stains on the floor leading to the stairs. Quentin quickly pushed David aside and saw under the stairs, in the dressing room, Belinda lying face down with her arms outstretched in a large hole in the back of her head. David seemed too shocked to say anything or rush to his wife's body. He took out his cell phone and called the police. Police immediately rushed to the scene but did not enter the house immediately because the Temple family's dog, Shaq, was aggressive. The dog growled and barked at the uniformed officers, prompting one of them to draw his gun. However, the situation was calmed when David Temple came out of the house, then led the dog into the garage. When the officers entered the house, they investigated the scene and concluded that it appeared that a robbery had occurred. They speculated that the burglars did not know that the homeowner was in the house at the time, so they shot her to avoid exposing witnesses. The police began investigating the crime scene. They wondered how the burglar could have entered a house guarded by a ferocious bull terrier. They began to investigate carefully. At the main entrance, the police found broken glass. But this glass was not broken by someone trying to unlock it from the inside, as the glass fragments would have been concentrated near the threshold. Instead, the glass fragments were located far from the door to the right of the entrance. This indicated that the main door was unlocked and the glass was broken, and it was unclear why the burglar did so. The police opened the box on the nightstand in the living room and found several pieces of jewelry that appeared to be gold. It was unclear why the burglar did not take these pieces of jewelry. The more they investigated, the more suspicious the police became that something was not right around the case. The police's experience with robberies had taught them that the criminal would usually take whatever was valuable and could be found. But in this case, nothing seemed to have been taken. And the fact that the dog was still in their minds was a big deal. Something was wrong with the case. In the murder, the wound suggested the victim had been shot in the back of the head. It is likely that the weapon used was a 12-gauge shotgun since the victim was kneeling with his back to the killer. But shotguns were uncommon in robberies and were difficult to carry or transport without being detected, which made the police even more suspicious. In the murder of Belinda, it happened at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. A typical criminal would not dare go out with a shotgun in the daytime. David mentioned that he owned a few rifles. However, when the police came to search, the handgun involved in the case was not among the weapons that David had reported. The police asked David to come to the police station to file a report and confess the stolen items. Although worried, David agreed to participate. Police began investigating Belinda's relationships. A young boy named Riley Joe Sanders came to the attention of the police. Riley is a student of Belinda's at school. He has an explosive personality and is especially fond of skipping school. Belinda was not one of those teachers who turned a blind eye to student absenteeism. So when she noticed that one of her students, Riley, had been absent from class for months, she immediately reached out to her colleagues. She wanted to know if this was her problem as a teacher or if the boy was a systematic truant. Her colleagues answered that it was not her problem. Boy was brought up in a bad family and no one cared about him. He appeared at school only rarely. Belinda couldn't leave it at that. That same evening she visited his mother, who lived nearby, and had a serious talk with her, which later bore fruit. However, it wasn't quite what the young teacher had expected. Riley Joe Sanders came to class. But during a basketball game, when Sanders pushed his opponent and Belinda pointed out Riley's disgusting behavior, he insulted her with the last words and even said something like, "You'll answer to me for this. You better look around, especially in the evenings." Riley had no explanation for where he was on the day of the murder and had also threatened Belinda. He was brought in for questioning. His father had a 12 caliber gun, but when the police searched the house, they did not find a weapon. When Riley realized that the police suspected him, he confessed that he had been with friends on the day of the murder. He had kept quiet because he had been in a large group and did not want to hurt anyone. The charges against Riley were dropped. Beside that, the police began questioning Quentin Harland. David and Quentin were not only neighbors but also co-workers at the same school. They had a close friendship and often met outside of work to watch sports on TV or attend family barbecues. One day, David and Quentin discovered a new young teacher at the school named Heather Scott. Quentin showed special interest in her, even asking her out to dinner, but Quentin's efforts were unsuccessful because Heather declined the invitation. Quentin accidentally discovered a secret relationship between David and another woman. This made Quentin very angry and resentful because David was married and had a son. However, Quentin kept it a secret and did not reveal anything to others. In the work environment, David and this woman seemed to be a happy couple, and many people in the teaching staff had the same impression. However, no one knew that David had another wife named Belinda. Belinda did not suspect that her husband was having an affair. In fact, she even shared with Quentin that she suspected that David was cheating, but Quentin reassured her that David was a good man and could not do such a thing. However, the way David treated Belinda also changed over time. In the past, he was very respectful and loving towards her, but now he often insulted and hurt her. He called her fat, even though she had only gained the little weight after giving birth. He also often asked her to go to another room when there were guests in the house, as if she did not deserve to be with everyone. Belinda felt extremely unhappy and lonely when faced with this treatment from David. She did not dare to talk seriously with him about this, but cried at night and felt bad about herself. Meanwhile, David was in a very happy new romantic relationship with Heather. David increasingly distant from his family. The psychological pressure he put on his wife was increasing. Although he never raised a hand to hit her, their interactions consisted almost exclusively of insults. At this time, Belinda learned that she was pregnant. When she received this news, she forgot all of David's previous mistakes and felt very happy. It seemed that David also tried to present himself as a happy father, but he was unsuccessful. Sometimes David did not come home at night, and Belinda was afraid to ask him why he was absent at night. She was afraid that her husband might become very angry and cause a scandal. Therefore, Belinda often had to do everything herself while preparing for the birth of the child. She went shopping, painted the walls herself, and assembled the furniture she had bought. David seemed unconcerned and made no effort to help his wife. Belinda prepared everything for the upcoming baby herself, while David seemed to be only concerned with his new relationship. Christmas was approaching, and Belinda was 8 months pregnant. She decided to discuss with her husband David what gifts they would give each other for the occasion. However, David suggested that they skip giving each other gifts this year. He thought it would be better if they used their savings for the upcoming baby, as the doctors had warned that she might go into labor early and the baby might be born before the new year. When Christmas came, although they had agreed not to give each other gifts, David did not give Belinda any small gifts. Instead, he suddenly packed his things and said that he would spend the New Year holiday hunting with his friends. Belinda felt disappointed and shared the situation with her sister. Her sister decided to help Belinda feel less alone. She also wanted to be there to care for Belinda, as doctors had warned that labor could start at any moment. What Belinda did not know, however, was that David had not gone hunting with his friends. Instead, he had spent the holiday with Heather, who was wearing a gold necklace that was said to have been a Christmas gift from David. After the death of Belinda Temple, David remarried Heather in 2001 and they had a son, Evan. But in November 2004, David's peace was shattered when the police came knocking on his door and arrested him on suspicion of murdering his ex-wife. David continued to deny any guilt. Investigators discovered that his new relationship with Heather may have been the motive for the crime. David's co-workers said that when Belinda became pregnant, David often bragged that he had found a younger, more beautiful woman to replace his wife. According to the prosecution's report, David killed Belinda as soon as she got home, still wearing her uniform and work boots. He then staged the crime scene to look like a robbery by making a mess of the house and quickly taking his son to the park to create an alibi. The prosecution also added that nothing was stolen from the house, and there was a vicious dog in the yard that would not let any stranger in. The murder weapon was probably dropped by David in the rice paddy, as witnesses saw David's car stop near the paddy, with only Evan in the car at the time. However, the shotgun was never recovered in that area. Heather's testimony claimed that before Belinda's murder, her relationship with David was not serious and she did not even love him. These words certainly did not please Temple and introduced confusion into the jury's decision. Could David kill his wife for a non-serious relationship? Or was Heather lying to save her husband? It wasn't until 2023 that the case was revisited. David was found guilty after all and was sentenced to life in prison with parole after 17 years. His son Evan, while the trial was ongoing, did not believe that his father was capable of such a cold-blooded murder and supported him until the last moment. This case takes us to Memphis, Tennessee, a part of the world with a big history, one that is rich in creativity and culture, with many a talent coming out of there, and many big moments that contributed to the history books. One person that saw their career catapult to new heights after moving to Memphis was 34-year-old Lorenzen Wright. Born in 1975, Lorenzen was a sprightly child with an abundance of energy and a huge smile. His mother Deborah lived with her mother, who helped her to raise him. And although his father Herb didn't live with them, he was very much a big part of his son's life. From a young age, Lorenzen's dream was to play professional basketball. His family said they knew he had a natural gift for it, saying this was helped further by how tall he was. His mother Deborah said he was such a long baby she couldn't lie him down on her lap because his head would go off her knees. The minute Lorenzen started playing, he showed an instant flair for basketball, with people describing him as a force of nature on the court. His parents were just as passionate about helping him succeed and making his dreams a reality. Lorenzen split his time between his mother's home in Oxford and his father's home 80 miles away in Memphis. He started off playing for Lafayette High School in Mississippi before he moved to Memphis permanently and spent his senior year playing for Booker T. Washington High School. With an array of college scholarship offers, Lorenzen had some big choices to make. Ultimately, he decided to go with the Memphis Tigers at Memphis State University and threw absolutely everything he had into it. Straight out of university, his life would change forever. He entered the 1996 NBA draft and was the 7th overall pick in the first round, being drafted by the Los Angeles Clippers. Lorenzen soon married Shara Robinson, who he had known since his junior year. They had met through a basketball game. Her father was one of his coaches. Over the coming years, the couple would go on to have 7 children together. In 1995, their first child, Lorenzen Wright Jr., was born. After this came their eldest daughter, Lauren. Twins, Lamar and Shamar, their daughter, Sophia, a son called Lawson, and a daughter, Sierra. Lorenzen doted on his children, with those that knew him saying nothing was more important than them. In 1999, he moved from the Los Angeles Clippers to the Atlanta Hawks before being traded to the Memphis Grizzlies in 2001. His friends said he loved his newfound fame, embracing his fans and never turning anyone down for an autograph or a picture. Although overwhelming, he enjoyed this side of his career and used it as a way to give back to everyone that had supported him along the way. Professionally, he was reaching highs some could only dream of, but personally, his life would soon take a devastating turn. Sierra was born in 2002, but tragically, just 11 months later, she passed away in their family home from sudden infant death syndrome. This fueled Lorenzen to found the Sierra Simone Wright Scholarship Fund, named after his baby girl. The scholarship fund granted an annual scholarship to a Memphis high school senior who had plans to attend a Memphis area college or university. His philanthropy continued with him contributing to numerous children's charities, hosting basketball camps, contributing to children's reading programs, and visiting St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. In 2006, he made the move back to the Atlanta Hawks. 2 years later, he was involved in a multiplayer trade, moving from Atlanta to Sacramento Kings. And shortly after this, he moved to the Cleveland Cavaliers. Lorenzen Wright had well and truly had a very successful career, playing in over 770 NBA games, spanning an incredible 13 seasons and garnering around $50 million in contracts. But as 2010 came around, a bad thumb injury, Lorenzen Wright retired from professional basketball. Those that knew him said that over the last few years, he had played as hard as he'd worked, and a lot of the huge fortune he had amassed during his time in the NBA was all but gone. As well as buying lavish homes and new cars, a vast amount of money had been given to various family members, friends, and the community that loved him, with one of his friends saying he was a giver. He gave to anybody who put their hand out. He bought people cars and houses, helped them open businesses and enter colleges. His custom-built 17-room home in Tennessee was repossessed, as was his $1.1 million home in Atlanta. He was also in arrears on his $26,000 a month alimony and child support obligations, and Shara claimed they often had creditors knocking at the door. After years together, in January 2010, he and Shara divorced. Lorenzen moved to Atlanta, while his ex-wife and children remained in Memphis, Tennessee. He still had a home in Tennessee and would come back and forth to see his family. Many sources state that he and Shara still had an intimate relationship, but remained separated. Sources said that Lorenzen was a serial cheater, whilst others say the infidelity definitely came from both sides. At one point in Atlanta, Lorenzen phoned a friend and told him he wanted to come back to Tennessee permanently and get back together with Shara, expressing how unhappy he was away from his family and ex-wife. Needless to say, things did appear to be on the up for Lorenzen career-wise. He had 2 NBA teams inviting him to try out, and he was scheduled to fly to Israel to try out for a team there. His friend and roommate Michael said that Lorenzen was planning on traveling back to Memphis mid-July, but in the days leading up to it, he seemed a bit on edge and not really himself. His children had already spent a lot of time with him in Atlanta over the summer, and Lorenzen was telling everyone how much fun they were all having, watching films as a family, visiting amusement parks and water parks, and practicing basketball together. But the plan was, Lorenzen was to visit Memphis for a short while and take his children back to Atlanta with him so they could spend the rest of the summer there. On July 18, 2010, with this plan in mind, Lorenzen flew back to Memphis. He had hopes of attending his sister's baby shower and proudly watched his eldest son, Lorenzen Wright Jr., play basketball. Throughout the day, he caught up with some friends and even took a picture of himself on one of his friends' phones. He then spent some of the evening at Shara's house, leaving late into the night. Germantown police receive a disturbing 911 call. 11 gunshots could be heard in quick succession, but the words coming from the caller were unclear. When the call was silent, the dispatcher assumed it was a hang-up. The person on the end of the line would later turn out to be 34-year-old Lorenzen Wright. Lorenzen never showed up to his sister's baby shower, and after repeatedly trying to get hold of him, his mother Deborah was starting to worry. He was also set to be his friend's best man, and his failure to turn up to that rang even more alarm bells. Although some of his friends thought he might have just wanted a break, when Deborah learned that her son wasn't even returning his daughter Lauren's calls, she knew she had to talk to the police. On July 22nd, Deborah filed a missing persons report and officers arrived at Shara's house to take some statements. Shara told police that Lorenzen had left the house on the night of July 18th with a random man she didn't know, some drugs, and an unspecified but considerable sum of money. He was on the phone at the time and said to the person on the other end he was going to flip something for $110,000. Shara said after this, he got into his car with the man and was not seen or heard from again. Rumors began to circulate that Lorenzen was deeply involved in drugs, possibly even a cartel, and people wondered if this was behind his disappearance. But if he left the house with a vast amount of cash, the possibility of a robbery being at the root of what had happened was also something to be considered. Lorenzen's disappearance became a high-profile and well-publicized case straight away, and media outlets started running with the story. 8 days would pass with nothing from Lorenzen. Although she was holding out hope, Deborah said that every day that went by, she knew the outcome was looking less and less positive. Finally, the police caught a break. The 911 call that had come in would soon finally be followed up on, and the link was made to the missing Lorenzen. The dispatcher that had answered the call did not report what she had heard to her supervisor, nor was the call tracked in any way to try and find out the location. Failure to report the call would result in a payout to Lorenzen's family, and police acknowledged the 9 days that had come and gone had hindered the investigation massively. After finally following up on the call and pinpointing the location, on July 28th, a terrible discovery was made. Lorenzen's body was found in a grassy area of southeast Shelby County. The road near his body was called Callus Cutoff, a shortcut that only people that knew the area well would be aware of. It was a route that Lorenzen would often take to visit his mother, as it was a lot quicker. The severe decomposition due to the time that had lapsed and the hot summer weather had left him weighing just 57 pounds, and police said that if you knew him well, visually identifying him would have been almost impossible. When Deborah got the call, she was desperate to see her son. She thought if she followed his route and went to the location, she might find some clues as to how this had happened. Despite police trying to stop her, she forced her way under the tape and ran to where he was. The autopsy revealed that he had been shot at least 5 times, but possibly more, and the 911 call he had made that night had definitely picked up his final moments. There were 2 shots in his head, 2 bullets in his chest, and bullet fragments in his right forearm. Officers reported that there were 2 different shell casings nearby, implying there could have been multiple murder weapons, but no guns were found at or near the scene. Despite this, would be some time before police officially ruled it foul play. Fans, family, and friends gathered around the scene of the crime, including Lorenzen's former teammates, and tributes began pouring in. Investigators said the area Lorenzen was found in was so quiet, so remote, and so dark at night, no matter how many times he drove down that road, he must have felt something was wrong unless he was forced or lured out there or his car was followed. Several days later, on August 1st, Memphis police conducted a search of Shara's home. They found burned pieces of metal and a burnt letter addressed to both Lorenzen and Shara. But law enforcement did not confirm if this meant anything. Neighbors said that Shara had been burning things in the garden several nights before with an unknown male, which seemed out of place given how swelteringly hot the weather was. Lorenzen had a close group of friends, some of which he saw the nights he went missing, and all of them were trying to piece together what had happened to him. The only thing that sprung to mind was that Lorenzen had received a phone call at some point during the evening from Shara. The call was described as unpleasant and very heated, with lots of shouting coming from Shara's end. Lorenzen told his friend that he would go and see his ex-wife, hopefully calm her down, then call him later to meet back up. But Lorenzen would never make that call. A few days later, a public memorial service was held for him. Hundreds of fans, family members, and friends poured into the FedEx Forum in Memphis to show their love and pay their respects. Each one of Lorenzen and Shara's children was wearing a different team hat to honor their father's 13-year NBA career. Memphis Grizzlies owner Michael Heisley said, to make sure things like this don't happen again. That's the biggest service you could pay him. After this, things went very quiet. A year would pass with no arrests being made and no substantial movement being made either. Investigators were finding it tremendously tough to solve a high-profile case with actually very little evidence to go on and no clear motive as to why someone could want him dead. Crime in Memphis was most definitely not uncommon. In 2001, 2005, and 2007, Memphis was ranked the 2nd most dangerous city in the nation among cities with a population of over 500,000. And according to the FBI, in the same year Lorenzen was killed, Memphis was declared the 3rd most dangerous city in the United States. With various types of crimes being so prevalent and widespread for a long time, police were concerned they may never get the answers they need, as the reality was it could just be completely random for no real reason. In 2011, a reward for any information in the case stood at $21,000. Crime Stoppers had had less than 50 tips come in, and the fear about whether or not the case would reach a conclusion loomed over everyone. One officer recalled they weren't sure whether people were staying quiet because they genuinely didn't know what had happened, or because they did know and were scared to talk. A year later, however, in 2012, a man who was already in prison asked to talk to the FBI. He said he had information regarding the case and the people involved. In 2009, he was acquitted of murdering his girlfriend and was out on bail at the time Lorenzen was killed. He was finally convicted on the lesser charge of second-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years behind bars. He said he could tell police exactly where to find the gun that killed Lorenzen and spoke about a failed plot to kill him once before. Authorities kept this very quiet, but started to look into these claims carefully and thoroughly. While this was going on, Shara was involved in a legal issue herself. As part of their divorce settlement, Lorenzen took out a $1 million life insurance policy, which was paid to Shara 1 year after his death. Lorenzen specified the policy was intended for their children, but according to one source, within months of receiving the $1 million, Shara had spent all but $5.05. Lorenzen's father and executor of his estate, Herb, proceeded to sue Shara on behalf of his grandchildren. The lawsuit claimed that Lorenzen had directed the money be spent on their children, but it was reported that the money had been spent in various other ways, including almost $100,000 on new cars, $69,000 on furniture, $346,000 for a new home and renovations, $5,000 for lawn equipment, and $11,750 for a trip to New York. Shearer, however, insisted the family was financially sound, with $1.4 million in assets to fall back on, but she later agreed to a confidential settlement. That same year, Shearer published a book called Mr. Tell Me Anything. Part of the description read, "With the constant chaos surrounding women, new acquaintances, family, and greed, their efforts would soon appear to be ultimately in vain. Combined with the newfound lies and deception, she finds herself questioning his commitment. A breaking point is reached. She makes a life-altering decision. Does it work out for her good? Did all his lies finally catch up to him? Would he or she pay the ultimate price?" It painted a picture of a marriage shrouded in vengeance, greed, volatility, and violence. Eyebrows were raised, and people were left wondering if this work of fiction was far more than that. While some believed this was all based on truth, painting the relationship as toxic, others said it was nothing more than fictitious and damaging lies, and wasn't based on reality and the person Lorenzen was. Shearer was interviewed by several journalists after the release and had in part this to say: "It had now been 7 long years since Lorenzen's body was found. The investigation into his death had become one of Memphis Police Department's most high-profile, unsolved cases." Shearer had since married and divorced and briefly dated a journalist called Kelvin Cowens, who interviewed her about her book. The pair eventually moved to Houston together with Shearer's children. Kelvin said the relationship eventually crumbled because he couldn't get past what he described as an obsession with Shearer getting money from Lorenzen's estate. November 9, 2017 Operation Rebound. Thanks to the tip-off from the man imprisoned 5 years before, officers finally located the gun, believed to have been the murder weapon. It was found in a lake in Walnut, Mississippi, about 45 miles away from where Lorenzen was found, and just as the man had said. Major Darren Goods, who was helping to lead the investigation, would dub this find as Operation Rebound, describing it as a fresh look into the case. "In basketball, when you get a rebound, that gives you a second chance," he said. "This would give us a second chance to bring some closure to this case and give this grieving family some relief." The man that had tipped investigators off about the gun and the plan to kill Lorenzen would soon be revealed to be Jimmy Martin. Jimmy Martin was actually Shearer's cousin. A month later, in December 2017, huge and shocking new developments were announced. Billy Ray Turner, a Shelby County landscaper and church deacon, was indicted on first-degree murder charges and held on $1 million bond, which would soon be upped to $15 million. The gun that had been found at the bottom of the lake was traced back to him. Billy was a deacon in Shearer's church and had done some yard work for the Wright family before. Rumors had been swirling that Billy and Shearer were actually romantically involved. For days later, Shearer Wright Robinson was also arrested in California and would be held on a $20 million bond. While a lot of people were left shocked that Lorenzen's ex-wife could be involved, those close to Lorenzen said this revelation came as no surprise. Officers believed that Shearer had tried to kill Lorenzen before, and according to Jimmy's statement, this happened when Shearer went to Atlanta to see Lorenzen. While she was in his home, she had left a window unlocked, with the intent of Jimmy and Billy entering the home at night and killing him. According to Jimmy, this is exactly what he and Billy did. As they opened the window and crept inside, they noticed Lorenzen's roommate Michael happened to be asleep downstairs. They also realized that Lorenzen was not home. The pair quickly left and a new plan was laid out. According to everything police knew, Lorenzen was somehow lured into the grassy area where he was met with Shearer and Billy. Officers felt strongly that they could put Sherry at the scene, but it remains unconfirmed as to whether or not she pulled the trigger on either gun. After he had been killed, Jimmy said the pair confessed to him and he said he would help them clean up the crime scene. Jimmy said that he used a metal detector to help find one of the guns that had been dropped in the commotion, and after Jimmy and Billy cleaned everything up, the gun was thrown into the lake miles away. A trial date of September 16, 2019 was set for both Shearer and Billy. They were expected to be tried at the same time as co-defendants. Shearer and Billy's defense would center heavily around Jimmy's credibility as a witness, with Shearer going as far as to claim Jimmy had more evidence pointing to him as the killer than she did, and both legal teams saying that Jimmy's violent history was enough to prove that he himself was probably behind all this. When Billy was arrested, he had a good on him, so he still had the charge of an illegal possession of a firearm hanging over his head, as well as the first-degree murder charge. The firearm charge alone carried a potential sentence of up to 20 years. Billy and his lawyer decided it was safer to plead guilty to the firearms charge. After Shara's lawyers learned about the plea, they started to worry that Billy and his team could use this as leverage to testify against Shara. Her legal team described this as being disastrous if it were to happen. After this, in an unscheduled court hearing, Shara walked into the courtroom. Shara entered a plea of guilty to the lesser charge of facilitation of first-degree murder and the attempted facilitation of first-degree murder. She said, "I'm just going to say because of my children, I have made this decision, and because of them, I'm not going to go into many more details right now. But I'm just going to say everything is not what it seems." In exchange for her plea, she was sentenced to 30 years in prison and will be eligible for parole after serving 30% of her sentence, roughly 9 years, a possibility that left those who knew and loved Lorenzen very upset. Despite many pushbacks due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Billy Ray Turner was next to face the courts. He pleaded not guilty to all counts. Jimmy, who had been granted immunity, along with many other witnesses and experts, took to the stand. The lead prosecutor, Paul Hagerman, painted a picture of Billy as a key participant in the plan to lure Lorenzen from his home. He did, however, acknowledge that Billy could have been left vulnerable to share his manipulation because she was his trusted friend. An alleged secret love interest. Flare-ups between the lawyers and the judge in the courtroom would also happen on occasion. In March 2022, after just 2 hours of deliberations, Billy Ray Turner was convicted of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and attempted first-degree murder. He was handed a life sentence. Judge Lee Coffey, who had presided over everything, was praised for his work throughout the hearings and trial. With 3 different versions of events and one story that will never come to light, it is likely that the full truth of what happened that night and the reason behind why it happened will never be known. The former director of Memphis Police, Tony Armstrong, said, "The only motive is, he was worth more dead than he was alive. These kids, they suffered. Not only was their father taken, their mother's gone too. There are no winners." Lorenzen's pastor said, "Not only was he physically murdered, but his character was assassinated. I want people to know who Lorenzen Wright was, the kind of human he was. Too many people bought into the lies. We're trying our best to cleanse the name of Lorenzen." Lorenzen's children still work to keep their father's name and legacy alive. Lorenzen Wright Jr. was a basketball player too, and worked as a coach training high school students. Lauren Wright is married and resides in Charlotte, North Carolina, and some sources say has the guardianship of his sister Sophia. Lorenzen's twin boys Lamar and Shamar are also basketball players, playing for the SIU Edwardsville Cougars in the NCAA. Little is known about Lawson apart from the fact he resides in Texas and supports his siblings in everything they do. They all believe their mother's innocence and they remain a tight family unit. Sadly, the relationship between Deborah and her grandchildren became distant after the arrest and conviction of Shara. Deborah has since reconnected with Shamar, hopes one day to gain back the closeness with her other grandchildren. She said for now, she will love them from afar. Lorenzen's parents were such a driving force in pushing the case and continuing to keep their son's story alive in the media. "I knew I couldn't give up," Deborah said. "If I gave up, who was going to take my place?" Michael Haight was born on January 7, 1980 in Seattle, Washington, and later moved to Cedar City, Utah with his family after his father finished dental school. As a child, Michael was very active and enjoyed playing sports like baseball, basketball, and soccer. He also excelled in school and achieved the rank of Eagle Scout. After graduating from high school in 1998, Michael worked at a fish plant in Alaska for the summer, where he quickly proved himself as a leader, rising to the position of line manager and overseeing a team of over a dozen men. This experience showcased his strong work ethic and dedication. Michael then embarked on a mission trip to South Brazil with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which deepened his faith and commitment to his religious community. When he returned to the United States, he pursued a business degree at Southern Utah University, graduating in 2004. During his time at the university, Michael met his future wife, Tasha Earl, and they fell in love. They got married in the St. George Temple on May 10, 2003. Michael appeared to be a devoted husband and father, often spending quality time with his family at sports events, school concerts, and working on projects together in the garage. On January 4, 2023, a shocking discovery was made at the Haight residence in Enoch. 8 bodies were found, leaving investigators and neighbors stunned. The events leading up to this gruesome finding began when Tasha Haight missed an online appointment and her husband Michael failed to show up for work. Their concerned colleagues contacted the police to perform a welfare check at the Haight residence. When officers arrived, they knocked on the door but received no response. As they surveyed the property, it seemed empty. Considering the Haights had 5 children, the police reached out to the Iron County School District to check if any of the kids were in school that day. However, it was found that none of the children were present. Before entering the home, the police cleared the premises to ensure it was safe to do so. After a thorough search, authorities confirmed that no one required medical attention, and there was no active threat. The Haight's single-story residence with a basement was declared a crime scene, and detectives arrived shortly after. In the main bedroom, detectives found 4-year-old Gavin lying on his stomach. His head turned to the left, with one arm under his head on a pillow and a blanket covering part of his body. Tasha, Gavin's mother, was also partially covered by the blanket. On the other side of the bed, detectives found an older woman, later identified as Gail Earl, Tasha's mother, lying on her back with her head resting on a pillow and partially covered by a blanket, similar to her daughter and grandson. In Bree's room, the 12-year-old girl was found lying in bed, slightly inclined and partially covered with a blanket. In Amon's room, a 7-year-old boy was found lying face down in the corner, without a pillow or blanket. His twin sister Sienna was discovered in her bedroom, lying on her left side in bed, with her head on a pillow and covered with a blanket. The eldest child, 17-year-old Macy, was found in her bed, with her head on a pillow and her body covered with a blanket. In the exercise room of the basement, the detectives found Michael Haight lying on top of a sleeping bag. Sadly, all 8 family members were found dead from gunshot wounds. It quickly became clear to the detectives that Michael Haight was the main suspect, and they believed he had killed his wife, mother-in-law, and 5 children before taking his own life. When detectives started investigating, a neighbor provided vital information that helped them reconstruct the crime's timeline. The neighbor told police she woke up at 3:30 a.m. to use the bathroom, and as she left her room, heard a loud bang that sounded like fireworks. However, realizing it was after the allowed date for fireworks in the neighborhood, she felt annoyed rather than alarmed by the noise. The neighbor reported hearing an initial loud bang, followed by 2 more in quick succession, then a short pause, another bang, and a longer pause before the final bang. Based on this testimony and the condition of the 8 bodies found inside the house, the detective inferred that the loud noises heard around 3:30 a.m. were directly connected to the events that unfolded that night, leading them to believe that Michael Haight committed the brutal killings during this time frame. During the investigation into the Haight family murders, detectives discovered a 2020 report from an unnamed individual who had notified the Utah Division of Child and Family Services about abuse in the Haight household. According to the report, 14-year-old Macy had confided in this individual about her fear of her father, sparking a further investigation. The authorities then interviewed Macy and her parents separately. During Macy's interview, she revealed disturbing information. Her father had choked her on multiple occasions, and she lived in fear of being killed by him. She reported that the violent attacks began in 2017, and recounted an incident where her father grabbed her by the shoulders and pushed her into a wooden piece of furniture. Michael Haight denied hurting his daughter when questioned by detectives, passing off the incidents as misunderstandings and attributing his emotional state to his father's recent death and his brother's divorce. He claimed to have taken out his frustrations on his older daughter. Despite this, Tasha chose not to press charges, and the Utah Department of Children and Family Services, the Enoch Police Department, and the Iron County Prosecutor's Office also declined to pursue the case, as it did not meet the legal requirements for prosecution. A lethality assessment was conducted with Tasha, which indicated that her relationship with Michael was not life-threatening. As a result, victim services were made available to Tasha and her children for several months. Further investigation revealed a different side of Michael, unknown to the community. According to Tasha's friends, they had to speak quietly or turn on the kitchen water when visiting Tasha. As they suspected Michael was monitoring and eavesdropping on their conversations, Tasha's friends would often help her clean the house when they visited, which prevented Michael from finding fault with her. When texting Tasha, her friends noticed that she would respond with brief, positive messages, likely to maintain a positive image in case Michael read them. This suggested that everything was fine in their marriage. The detectives investigating the case discovered that Michael exhibited highly controlling behavior towards Tasha. For instance, he would take away her car keys and phone to restrict her freedom. Another red flag was his overreaction when Tasha bought a $30 rug from Walmart to replace a dirty one, which was a legitimate need. Michael's anger was unwarranted, and he claimed the purchase was excessive. Tasha confided in her friends that her 7-year-old son, Aman, was increasingly imitating Michael's bad behavior. When Tasha gave Aman instructions, he would respond, "That's not my job," which concerned Tasha, as it showed his lack of responsibility and disregard for authority. Tasha's friends reported that in 2022, Tasha attempted to prioritize her own well-being by getting her nails done, a rare treat for her given her many responsibilities. However, her husband Michael refused to let her do so, imposing strict limits on her autonomy and freedom. Moreover, Michael frequently disregarded or ignored Tasha's instructions, and their friend Aman often followed his lead in doing so. Tasha felt more confident in her appearance after indulging herself, and she decided to get her nails done every month. However, Michael was unhappy about this decision and expressed his disapproval, worried about the cost. Tasha explained that it would only cost $25 per month, but Michael was unconvinced, arguing that the money could be better spent on their children. Michael's reaction was rooted in his need for control and sense of financial responsibility towards their family. Around the same time, Tasha started prioritizing her self-care and began losing weight, which had been a sensitive topic for her since Michael had often called her fat and ugly. However, instead of being supportive, Michael became furious and accused Tasha of cheating on him, trying to explain the sudden change in her appearance. Michael's controlling behavior escalated as he tried to manipulate Tasha's weight loss, pleading with her to stop losing weight because he was worried that other men might find her attractive. This demand was driven by his own insecurities and desire for complete control over Tasha's body and behavior. Tasha's friends also told the police about an incident where the kitchen table broke and Tasha needed to buy a new one. However, Michael refused to give her the money, further demonstrating his controlling behavior. Tasha was fed up with the old table and decided to take initiative by refinishing it to make it look better and more functional. However, Michael was unhappy with her decision because she didn't ask for his permission first. Michael was extremely frugal during the holiday season. Despite earning a good income, he only gave Tasha $100 for each of their 5 children to buy presents, which was not enough in Tasha's opinion. Tasha always made sure her children had a wonderful Christmas, but Michael refused to provide more funds, claiming that he worked hard for his money and saw no reason to give more to his family. He believed that his income was rightfully his alone. Michael's passion for reducing waste and conserving resources led him to implement strict rules on household habits. He forced Tasha to wash and reuse plastic bags, even if they had been used only once or multiple times. This excessive demand for reusing bags added to Tasha's responsibilities, leaving her feeling burdened and overwhelmed. Michael's controlling behavior extended to every aspect of Tasha's life, including her daily routines. For instance, he demanded that she use baby wipes for cleaning, claiming it was better for the environment and more cost-effective. However, this requirement caused Tasha discomfort, hygiene issues, and unnecessary stress. If Tasha failed to follow Michael's instructions, she would face severe consequences, which he made clear would lead to serious trouble. This threat instilled fear and submission in Tasha, leaving her no choice but to obey Michael's demands. Natasha confided in her friends that while Michael had been cruel to her throughout their marriage, he had never directed this cruelty towards their children until the late 2010s. However, over time, the abuse towards their daughter Macy escalated, driving her to consider suicide. Michael had unrealistically high expectations for his daughter Macy, demanding she earn perfect grades despite her struggles, which were exacerbated by the emotional burden of his abusive behavior. This pressure was crushing for Macy. Macy's friends shared a disturbing incident with the detective. One evening, Michael returned home to find Macy comforted by her mother. He became enraged and ordered Macy to clean her room. This event left Macy deeply disturbed, remembering the hatred and evil she saw in her father's eyes. The detectives also discovered an incident where 7-year-old Briley disobeyed Michael while playing with a changing table. Michael responded by blaming his wife Tasha for their children's behavior, calling them the worst and most disrespectful in the world. He then humiliated Tasha, calling her fat and ugly in front of their 5 children. This painful incident prompted Tasha to plan her escape and file for divorce after 20 years of marriage. Tasha realized she had to leave her husband Michael after witnessing his abusive behavior and lack of self-control. She knew staying in the marriage would negatively impact her children, and their well-being was more important than her marital commitment. In December 2022, Tasha filed for divorce but asked for the papers to be delivered after Christmas to give her children one last normal holiday before the separation. When Michael received the papers, he tried to act normal, but Tasha saw through it. He told her to leave the children behind, but she refused, taking them to her mother's home in Lynn, Utah. Michael showed up at his mother-in-law's house trying to convince Tasha to go for a ride with him, but she refused, sensing danger. After filing for divorce, Tasha's mother moved in to support her and the children. However, Michael's actions worsened the situation. He refused to leave the family home, instead moving into the basement. Tasha discovered he had secretly transferred $220,000 from their children's savings accounts without her knowledge or consent. She also found that her inherited firearms were missing, leaving her family vulnerable. The couple's children, Macy and Briley, were affected by the constant drama at home. Macy had a secret phone to record her father's outbursts as evidence for the divorce, while Briley found solace at a neighbor's house. Both girls were relieved about their parents' divorce. On January 3, 2023, Tasha met with her attorney, expressing concerns about her divorce and Michael's volatile behavior. Although she had relocated him to the basement, the attorneys pressed her about feeling safe. Tasha reassured them she never feared for her or her children's well-being. But in hindsight, her optimism was tragically misplaced. A disturbing discovery emerged from the digital evidence found on the family's computers and cell phones. Just days before the tragic shooting, Michael made a series of concerning Google searches on December 30th at 10:41 p.m. These searches focused on firearms and shooting-related topics, revealing his sinister intentions. The search results showed Michael had asked alarming questions such as the loudness of a 9mm gunshot and what a gunshot sounds like. Before taking his own life, Michael wrote a note expressing his desire to end the controlling behavior he felt he was subjected to by his wife. He stated that he couldn't handle the situation for another day and wanted to escape the manipulation. Michael's note conveyed deep frustration and desperation as he repeatedly asked for help but felt ignored. He emphasized his determination not to be a burden to society. The details of this case have left many in shock, revealing a deeply dysfunctional family plagued by violence. Michael's actions were premeditated and calculated as he carefully planned the murders to catch his wife and children off guard. This case started on a freezing Saturday night in December 1991 in Austin, Texas. Two 17-year-old girls named Eliza Thomas and Jennifer Harbison were co-workers at the I Can't Believe It's yogurt store at the North Cross Mall. It was almost 11 o'clock at night and their shift was about to end. A little bit after 10 o'clock, Jennifer's sister, 15-year-old Sarah Harbison, and her friend 13-year-old Amy Ayers were hanging around the store. They were waiting for the girls' shift to end since the 4 of them were going to a slumber party together that night. To avoid being late to the party, Sarah and Amy entered the store to assist Eliza and Jennifer close up in time. However, when the clock struck 12 o'clock, Officer Troy Gay of the Austin Police Department was on patrol that evening when he saw smoke coming from the yogurt store. Firefighters quickly arrived on the scene after the officer called in. They soon discovered a horrifying scene while putting out the fire. In the store, the lifeless bodies of Jennifer, Sarah, Amy, and Eliza were strewn across the floor. It was obvious that they had been ruthlessly murdered. The teenagers were all bound and gagged in their own clothes while completely naked. Jennifer, Sarah, and Eliza were found in the rear of the back room, huddled into one corner while Amy's body was recovered in the middle of the back room. Sarah and Eliza were piled on top of one another and Jennifer was lying nearby. The girls' legs were wide open and one of them had an ice cream scoop tucked in between it. The killer or killers had gathered napkins and other combustible materials from about the shop, doused the victims with lighter fluid, and then set the place on fire before escaping, leaving their bodies almost completely burnt beyond recognition. Their autopsy results revealed that they had all been shot execution style in the back of the heads. Additionally, 2 or more of the girls had experienced sexual assault. Authorities also disclosed to the media that 2 firearms had been used in the killings, raising the possibility of at least 2 killers. Police investigators and the management of the yogurt shop determined that $540 or so was taken from the shop. It was unclear if the girls had been targeted particularly because someone knew they would be alone inside the store that night, or if the intended purpose had been a robbery and the culprit had then recognized a chance to take advantage of them. Lead Detective John Jones and his partner, Mike Huckabee, launched an immediate investigation into the case. There were several problems with the investigation right away. First of all, the firefighters who responded to the crime scene did their jobs, but ultimately washed away important forensic evidence in the process. Furthermore, the city of Austin had only one fingerprint unit at the beginning of the 1990s, which lacked forensic expertise. Additionally, there was only one homicide investigator working the shift the night of the murders due to the limited number of the city's homicide squad. Despite the police department's shortcomings, Detectives Jones and Huckabee had quite a large number of suspects. The police station's phones were ringing nonstop as tips poured in. When faced with 342 suspects and scores of fake confessions, the investigators became overwhelmed. The investigators started by looking into possible local serial killers, due to the graphic nature of the crime and the staging of the teenagers' bodies. This led them to Kenneth Allen McDuff. Kenneth Allen McDuff was a Texas serial killer who is thought to have committed at least 14 murders. On August 6, 1966, he was found guilty of killing 3 teenagers named Robert Brand, Mark Dunman, and Edna Louise Sullivan. These killings were known as the broomstick murders, because Edna's neck was broken like a broomstick after she had been sexually abused numerous times. For his crimes, Kenneth Allen McDuff was given a death sentence, but in 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court decided to end the death penalty in a 5-4 ruling, and his sentence was altered to life in prison with the chance of parole. He was granted parole in 1989 as a result of prison overpopulation. It is believed that Kenneth Allen McDuff further committed numerous killings upon his parole, including the 1992 slaying of Melissa and Northrup, a 22-year-old Texan. After many years of eluding authorities, McDuff was ultimately apprehended and put on death row. On November 17, 1998, the day before he was put to death, he admitted to killing the 4 teenagers at the yogurt store. He was foolish if he believed that making this last-minute confession would save his life. That day, as planned, he was put to death. Detectives looked into McDuff's confession, but disregarded him when fingerprints and hair taken from the yogurt store could not be used to identify him as the killer. About 8 days after the brutal killing of the girls, investigators received a tip to look into a teenager named Maurice Pierce. Maurice Pierce was a 16-year-old boy who was spotted with a gun that night at the North Cross Mall, where Sarah and Amy were hanging out before going to the yogurt store. The weapon was a handgun with a .22 caliber, the same caliber as one of the weapons used to kill the girls. However, nothing came out from the lead when Detectives Jones and Huckabee questioned Pierce, along with his 3 friends who accompanied him to the mall. Ballistics analysis of Maurice Pierce's gun revealed that it did not match the murder weapon. Additionally, just like with McDuff, none of the 4 suspects were identified by the fingerprints and hair samples taken from the crime site. The detectives eventually moved on from this. The case was given to new detectives after years went by without any arrests. Then in 1999, Forrest Wellborn Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen, and Maurice Pierce, the 4 earlier suspects now in their 20s, were apprehended for the killings at the yogurt store. These were the same suspects who had been questioned 8 days prior to the girls' deaths and had been let go due to a lack of evidence. Michael Scott, one of the suspects, admitted to the murders. He wasn't alone, though. Robert Springsteen also admitted to killing the girls and raping one of them. The police were sure they had their killers after these confessions. According to the theory, the 4 boys had intended to rob the yogurt shop. Forrest Wellborn waited outside and kept watch as Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen, and Maurice Pierce entered the store. The theft went horribly wrong, though, and all of the females were killed. The allegations against Wellborn were dropped after the authorities made 2 attempts to indict him for the killings, but were unable to do so due to a lack of evidence connecting him to the crime. Charges against Maurice Pierce were also dropped due to a lack of evidence, which was extremely difficult for the police and the families of the victims to accept, because he was thought to be the mastermind behind the crime and the subsequent killings. Both Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott were found guilty of capital murder after separate trials for the yogurt store killings. The state of Texas had approved a new death penalty statute, making it feasible for Robert Springsteen to receive the death penalty even after the Supreme Court decision in 1972. But Michael Scott received a 99-year jail sentence. However, shortly after their trials, grave questions were presented that showed Springsteen and Scott might not have been guilty. In the beginning, there was no tangible proof connecting any of them to the crime. Both men added that their confessions had been forced upon them, and there was some proof to support their assertions. One of the detectives working on the case was reassigned after it was claimed that he had forced confessions in an unrelated case. Additionally, a picture of another Austin police officer aiming a gun at Scott's head during questioning surfaced. Both convictions were overturned by the courts after they determined that they had violated Springsteen and Scott's Sixth Amendment right to confront their accuser. This came 15 years after the yogurt shop killings were perpetrated. During the trial, Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen's confessions were used against each other, but their attorneys were never permitted to cross-examine the accuser. It was determined that their constitutional rights had been violated as a result. Later, in 2008, DNA testing on the evidence gathered from the crime scene revealed that neither Scott nor Springsteen's DNA, nor that of any other persons accused of the crime, matched the results. According to then Travis County District Attorney Rosemary Laneberg, the yogurt store murder was committed by Scott and Springsteen. But the men would not be charged again until the unknown man linked to the DNA evidence at the crime scene was located. The majority of law enforcement officials continue to believe that the original 4 suspects were the culprits, and that the DNA evidence implicating a 5th suspect was a fabrication. The 5th suspect argument, according to Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen's defense attorneys, is absurd, and they emphasized that no one ever brought up a 5th suspect before the inconvenient DNA results came in. According to some attorneys, investigators, family members, and armchair detectives who have studied this case, the killers of the teenagers may have been 2 unnamed customers who were at the yogurt store right before it closed. Although 52 customers who had come into the store on the day of the murders were reportedly questioned by the police, 2 individuals who witnesses said were present at closing time have never been located. 3 customers left the store shortly before it closed, and on their way out, they reportedly saw 2 males seated in a booth, and they didn't appear to be planning to leave anytime soon. Perhaps the men ordered a soft drink. When Jennifer and her coworker decided to close the store, at least one of the customers witnessed her lock the front door and post a closed sign to prevent any additional customers from coming in. After all the other customers had left, only the 2 men in the booth remained. Witnesses gave the following descriptions of the persons of interest. One is around 5 foot 6 inches tall and has lighter hair, maybe like a dirty blonde. He seemed in his late 20s through early 30s. The second man is noted as being larger. Both were dressed in larger jackets, one of which was green, an army fatigue kind of looking jacket. The other had a black jacket. Neither of these males has been named as of yet. In the end, it is debatable if robbery was really the true motivation in this instance. It is difficult to believe that these killings were just the outcome of a robbery gone wrong, given the meager sum of money seized and the high level of violence. The likelihood that the murder was committed with sexual motivation and that the murderers only grabbed the money as an afterthought is substantially higher. It's possible that one of the girls knew the murderers, or it's possible that Sarah and Amy were followed from the mall to the yogurt store. Linking the DNA evidence discovered at the scene to the two male customers who were observed by witnesses lingering in the yogurt shop after closure could hold the key to solving this case. The 1991 murders at the yogurt business altered the city irrevocably. The murders were referred to by the then mayor as the crime where Austin lost its innocence. Residents of Austin began to doubt the safety of their community after the brutal and untimely deaths of 4 young girls who still had their entire lives ahead of them. The I Can't Believe It's yogurt store was converted into a nail salon, but a plaque honoring Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, Amy Ayers, and Elijah Thomas still stands in the parking lot beneath a large oak tree, serving as a reminder to anybody passing by that the murder case is yet to be solved, and that justice is yet to be served. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.